So good evening, everyone, and welcome to IMCC. I'm Jeff Frazier. I'm president of our board and one of our teachers. And I'm really excited and pleased to welcome our guest teacher tonight, Leslie Booker. Leslie, it would take me all night to read her bio, but just a couple of highlights. She's a graduate of Spirit Rock CDL and the recent, what's the name of the recent program, Booker, that you and Leila Kate were?
It's the teacher training.
Teacher training program.
Yeah.
And has taught for many years, has now recently moved to Philadelphia from New York. She has an extensive experience as a teacher, both with Sanghas, but also with incarcerated youth, folks at Rikers Island in New York. I mean, the experience just goes on and on. So I'm extremely excited to have us, that we're having Booker tonight. I should also say that Booker has deep roots here in Albemarle County. Her family is originally from Ivy, so she's somewhat of a homecoming for her. So we're offering her a warm welcome back to the Charlottesville area. Let me just say something about Donna. If you'd like to offer Donna to Booker tonight for her wisdom and her teaching, what we're going to do is just have you go to the IMCC website, which is how you got to this meeting. And on the homepage, there's a donate button. You can just donate through our website, and then we'll gather all the donations, all the Donna, and get it up to Booker that way. It's the most straightforward way to do it. So I'll remind you of that at the break. But if you do want to offer Donna, please go to our website. You can put a notation if you want, but we'll also just note any Donna that comes in tonight, any contributions that come in tonight or tomorrow will go to Booker. So without further ado, and Judy just put the link in the chat box for our donation link there. You can go from there as well. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Booker, and she's going to lead our set, and we'll have a little break at 20 of, and then she'll offer a Dharma talk. So Booker, warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. This is IMCC.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Judy, so much. Hey, y'all. It's great to see you, and I feel like I'm back home. So it's really beautiful to be here with you all this evening. And so we'll begin by meditating together. It's a novel idea. And one of the beautiful things about practicing from home is that we can take any of the 4 postures that work best for our bodies. And so, of course, there is sitting if the body is feeling like it wants to be upright and alert. There is standing practice if the body is feeling restlessness, if there's a lot of energy moving through the body. If you want to, I guess if you're more sleepy, you want to bring some more energy, you can do standing. If you want to do some walking practice, that's always great. You can do that off camera so you don't make us dizzy. And of course, if the body just needs to rest, if it's been a long day on Zoom, like it's been for me, you just need to let the body rest. You can also explore lying down practice. And if you are exploring lying down, I like to keep my bottoms of my feet on the earth and my knees sort of knocked together so that there is this connection to the earth. And also it supports my low back a little bit more. And one thing I like to do before I begin to practice is to orient or to resource to the environment that I'm in. Even though most of us are probably home and we've probably been there without much interruption for the past several months, I do like to take a moment to pause and orient around the space. So this is connected to what animals do in nature, where we turn our heads from side to side. And as we do, we're keeping the eyes wide open. So we're really scanning the horizon. And animals are typically looking for where there is food, where there is danger, where there is shelter, where there is water. And us in this human form, we're also feeling into a sense of safety, to a sense of orienting our nervous systems to have a sense of stillness. So we're noticing different colors in our environment. So things that are green, things that are orange, things that are red, things that are purple. Noticing different shapes. So, what is square and what is round? What is rectangle and what is triangle? And noticing elements of nature. For most of us on this call, we might be nighttime for us, and maybe there are stars out or the moon shining. I need to also notice plants and trees, if there's any pets nearby or loved ones in our environment. And what also supports my practice is to notice different textures. So this can be done by opening up the sense doors of touch as well as seeing. So I'm feeling the tightness of the socks around my feet, the softness of the blanket that I'm sitting on, noticing the weight of my shirt. And then taking a moment to look up as we notice how the height of the space that we're in. So, how much space is above us? We don't spend a lot of time looking up. Noticing the width of our space, so what is to the right of us and what is to the left of us. And then noticing the depth of our environment. And so what is in front of us? Maybe on the other side of our computer. And then noticing what is behind us. So perhaps looking over the right shoulder and looking over the left shoulder. And as we come back to neutral, we'll take a moment to rest the eyes in whatever way works best for us. So for some folks, we like to practice with the eyes open, so you can hold a soft gaze. You can rest the eyes by allowing the eyes to gently look down towards a spot in the earth. Or you can rest the eyes all together by allowing the top lid to gently touch the bottom lid. And we'll just take a moment to feel into the felt sense of this body, resting, being held by this earth. Some of us might be settling into our homes after a long day of work. So just touching into how the felt sense of the body is. If there is a racing of the heart. If there's energy moving through the body. Or perhaps there's some quietness that we've already established. And so just noticing how the body is right now, what we are showing up with this evening. And in that same vein, how is the mind? Is the mind still checking off all the things we forgot to do or haven't gotten around to throughout our long days? Is the mind planning or thinking, wondering, curious? And how is the heart today? So, what is the quality of this heart in this moment? And it might be useful to bring a hand to the heart or bring a hand down to the earth and just feel into this rhythm, this beating of this heart space. Is the heart expanded? Is it contracted? Is it spacious or is it already filled up? So just feeling into the felt sense of this heart resting inside this body. And perhaps the breath is beginning to deepen. And so checking in where there are points of contact between yourself and the earth, whether it's through the bottoms of the feet, the sits bones if you're sitting up. If the body is resting, perhaps a contact is through the back of the lungs or the back of the head. So just feeling this body connecting to the earth. Feeling the heaviness, the solidity, the density of these bones holding this body up and rooting us down into the earth at the same time. Knowing gravity as it roots us down into the earth. And so knowing this body as earth element, as earth holds earth, as earth supports earth, as earth rests on this earth. And in this stillness, you might begin to feel a subtle movement, this expansion, contraction, this arising and falling away as we begin to bring our awareness, our attention towards this breath. As the breath breathes itself in, and as the breath breathes itself out. I like to feel my breath low in my body. So perhaps bringing your hands to your low belly. And as you breathe in, feeling the belly expand underneath your hands. And as you breathe the breath out, feeling the belly button slide back towards your spine. So breathing the breath in and breathing the breath out. You might notice a slight tilting in the pelvic bone, an expansion and contraction of the rib cage, a rising and falling of the lungs. So as the body, the mind, the breath, and the heart begin to settle, perhaps we can connect with where is our anchor, that place where we keep coming back home to, whether it's the stillness of the bones or the movement and the rhythm of this breath. Where do we anchor down to? Where do we find refuge? When the mind begins to wander, where do we come back to? So thank you so much for your practice. We'll take about a 5-minute break and we'll come back at 20 of. And Jeff, did you have something you wanted to?
Yes, Booker, thanks. I just wanted to say a few more words about Donna. Donna, as you may know, roughly translates from the Pali to mean generosity. And Booker is offering her wisdom and her teachings tonight freely to us. And so if you would like to support her and you're inclined to do so, please go to our website. I think Donna can also be about gratitude. And I often talk about how gratitude and generosity are first cousins, and that gratitude can open our heart to generosity. And anyway, just if you would consider offering Donna to Booker tonight, we would really appreciate it. So thank you. We'll take a break.
All right. So let's go ahead and begin again. So something that I love to do before I start teaching is just to take a moment to look out amongst everyone who's in the room. And it's much different on Zoom because my vision's gotten very bad since I've been on Zoom these past several months. But I like to lean in and just kind of take a moment to get an idea of who's in the space. So if you want to join me in that, it's just really sweet to see who's joining us in our practice. There you are, Pat. Hello. It's great to find old friends amongst these pages. Hmm. So thank you all. Thanks for that moment. So, yeah, I am from Virginia, as Jeff had mentioned. I grew up in Northern Virginia. We lived abroad when I was a kid, but we came back and I lived mostly in Northern Virginia. And my mom is from Ivy. So my family has been on Peacock Hill and Old Turner Mountain Lane. We've been for about at least four generations, I think maybe even longer than that. And so I have a very sweet and deep connection to Charlottesville. So even though I haven't sat with you all in person, I feel like y'all are part of my old home place, as my mom says about Old Turner Mountain Lane. So it's really, really sweet to be with Virginia folks this evening. And I remember years ago when I first met Pat Coffey and I found out he was from the Charlottesville area. I was like, I'd never met like Dharma people from Virginia. And I was on my way home for Christmas about 4 years ago. And I called Pat and I think I emailed him and I said, I don't really know you, but like we were in the same room one time and, we knew each other a little bit. And I said, I'm going home for a tough Christmas. Can is there a possibility that I can reach out if things don't go well at home? And, it's just nice to have a little backup plan whenever you visit your parents for Christmas. And Pat was so sweet and so generous. And he swung by and scooped me up and went out for coffee one day. And he met my mom and maybe a niece or two was home. And it was just very sweet. And I haven't had the chance to teach much in Charlottesville, just when uh, when there was that incident at UVA, when the alt-right had kind of terrorized the UVA campus in downtown Charlottesville, I came down to do some workshops at UVA, but this is my first time teaching in Virginia. So it's really, really incredibly sweet to be here. And so this afternoon, I went for a walk after an incredibly long day on Zoom to reflect on what I wanted to share this evening with you all. This is my last talk of 2020. And so it's been a very auspicious year, and we're in a very auspicious week. And I don't really follow astrology that much, but a dear friend sent this to me today. And as you know, we're in this really interesting time with the planets. And this thing only happens every 2 decades where Jupiter and Saturn are in this great conjunction where they kind of come over top of each other. And their brightness just is kind of really gorgeous right now. And in Philly, it's been a little hazy, so we haven't really seen the brightness. But again, this only happens every 2 decades. And is saying what people are saying about it is that, so like a new moon, which happens every 29 and a half days. So every month we have a new moon. When the sun and the moon align at the same degree, Jupiter and Saturn do the same at this great conjunction. And so the difference is that the frequency. So this happens once every 2 decades. And they say that Saturn and Jupiter are the social consciousness planets. And so Saturn represents responsibility and Jupiter represents expansion. And when they conjoin at the same degree of the same sign to make this great conjunction, they commence a new cycle. And this sets the tone of an underlying macro societal trend. And it's a chance for this new personal transformation. And so, what a gorgeous way to end 2020. Um, and what an amazing time to offer a talk to folks in Virginia, my home state, and especially folks who are, for the most part, are living very close to the beautiful red clay of Ivy that I hold so sacred to me. And as things come to an end and invite us into a new cycle, it's also a great time for us to be in deep reflection of where we've been and where we want to go. And so, as I was preparing for my offering this afternoon, I spent some time just thinking about really what supports my practice, what supports wisdom and compassion, these two wings of the Dharma that bring balance into our lives. And I think of the Dharma as sort of like Gladys Knight and the Pips. Um, so Gladys Knight, as many of you know, is one of the most amazing singers of all time. And the Pips were her extraordinary background band. And the Pips also had their own career and did their own thing throughout Motown and sang backup for a lot of other singers. And the thing about them is Gladys Knight on her own is amazing. The Pips on their own are amazing, but you bring them together and they create absolute magic. And so that's kind of how I hold the Dharma. I feel like these teachings, they sort of swim in and out and swirl around each other, and they really support and lift each other up. And so practicing one thing is fine, like practicing, compassion is beautiful. But then you bring the other elements of the Dharma in that support them, and you really have something that is so expansive and sustainable and just really beautiful. And so, in my sharing this evening, we're going to go on a little journey through the Dharma. This is sort of like a Maha talk as I kind of dip into all the different aspects that have really supported my practice over this last year. And so, we'll be looking at mindfulness, equanimity, the precepts, Hadi and Ottappa, spiritual friends, and where my practice really begun was with faith. And so here we go. And so faith leads to 5 spiritual powers and is followed up with energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And so again, understanding how all of these practices show up and support each other. Faith is referred to as the seed of the Dharma of our practice. And without it, our spiritual life doesn't really have a place to flower from. And faith, what I love about faith is that it's intuitive, it's primordial. It's nothing that you can learn about academically. It's nothing that you can really study and like figure out how to do faith. It's just something that we are born with. And we continue to fine tune as our faith as we deepen and embody our practice. When a newborn cries, there is faith that their needs will be met. When we breathe in, we have faith that we're going to breathe out again. When we reach down towards the earth to bear witness to our waking up, we have faith that the earth will be underneath us to support us and to hold us. So all of these are acts of faith, trusting that there is benefit on the other side. So intellectually, faith is not substantiated by anything that you can have a very direct um, and factual evidence. You can't really touch faith. To be a matter of faith, a belief has to go beyond evidence that is available in that moment. And one who has faith has to be willing and ready to fill up the gaps in the evidence with an attitude of patience and trusting and acceptance. I love the foundation of the word, the etymology of the word faith. And in Pali, the word is sada. And it's connected to the Latin cor, which means heart, which also shares the same root with the word courage and corazon, which is the word heart in Spanish. And so faith is much more of a matter of the heart as opposed to a matter of the intellect. So early in my practice, I got really hit really hard with the bright faith bug. And so early in my practice, I actually, in my very first retreat, I got a chance to sit with Bhante Buddharakkhita, who is a monk from Uganda. And he has studied and trained at Spirit Rock, just as I would go on to do later on. And so Bhante is this amazing teacher. If any of you all have had a chance to sit with him. And after the end of my very first retreat, Bhante said, I'm opening a Buddhist center in Uganda. You should come and practice with me. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to go do that. And so I went to Uganda early on in my practice to have a personal retreat with this monastic. And when I was with Bhante and when I've studied abroad in general, our practice is very intertwined into our everyday lives. And so when I was there, Bhante was still building out the Uganda Buddhist Center. And so we spent a lot of time practicing as we ran errands to the hardware store, and practice when we were getting tested for malaria, and practice while we were being treated for malaria. And so the practice was something that I never laid down, that I always practiced no matter what was happening in my life. And at the end of my time there, I began to fear, began to creep in. I was like, oh my God, what did I do? I quit my job. I took my entire savings account all to go and study with a monk in Uganda for a few weeks. What am I going to do when I get back to New York? And I was still a younger person at that time. I had a very active New York life, but I was trying to figure out how to integrate these teachings, these learnings, this new way that my life had transformed. How could I bring that back and live this practice in New York? And so I asked Bhante for advice, and he said to me, your practice has to be your life, and your life has to be your practice. And there can be no separation between the two. And I thought, well, that's some bad advice. I didn't quite know how to do that. But what he was asking me, what he was inviting me to explore, was to have a life that was not fragmented, to have a life that was fully integrated, a life that was fueled by intention, a life that was integrated and whole. And so a life that didn't just access my practice when I was sitting on my cushion, gazing at my navel, but to really have a practice that moved through and followed me and informed every aspect of my life and everything that I did. And so this was my beginning of faith, of really learning and understanding that practice of faith. And after spending most of my adult life in New York and moving to Philadelphia recently, I had a 2-year little jaunt in Connecticut. And during this time, I began to support a really lovely Sangha, which I continue to support as their guiding teacher. And so every month we pick an aspect of the Dharma to teach. And so this month they are teaching on mindfulness. And so I was reading about mindfulness, and there was a definition that I read, and it said that mindfulness is, it says that a Buddhist owes his soberness to the cultivation of the third virtue of mindfulness. And I was like, that seems really boring and dry. Why would why would I want to practice mindfulness? And so I have 4 teachers I support. So I was like, what does mindfulness mean to you? So we sat together, we kind of just threw out different words that came alive for us when we thought about mindfulness. And so for me, I always think of like this collecting, this bringing together of a mind to bring it towards stillness, not to stillness, but towards stillness. And so there is this titration of like remembering our practice and then moving away from our practice and coming back to and moving out again. And so some of the words that were reflected were to express their knowing of mindfulness, or this turning towards, a knowing through the body, opening up the sense doors, sweetness, forgetting and knowing again, knowing that you're home, getting lost and finding your way back home again, listening quietly when it's very loud. They use the word sweetness several times to think about the word mindfulness. And they spoke to how it was deeply intimate. And so mindfulness reminds me that I can always come back home again. I haven't broken anything, nothing is damaged. I just need to collect the mind to redirect my attention back onto the path, which I know is much easier said than done, right? And so what deeply supports my mindfulness is to move through the world heart first, through knowing and exploring these 4 qualities of the heart and mind, the Brahma Viharas. And I think of them like siblings, and I love that um, that that Jeff just spoke to generosity and um, and gratitude as first cousins, and I love that because I often think of the Brahma Viharas as being siblings. So they kind of look similar, like they kind of sound alike. And some they're a little bit harder for you to see the resemblance, but there's something similar. They're very similar energy, but all of them, it's like, they kind of grew up in the same house together. And so again, the Brahma Viharas are also known as the divine abodes, as the 4 immeasurables, these boundless qualities. Then they are metta, the Pali word for kindness and benevolence. They are karuna, the Pali word for compassion, which is often described as this quivering of this heart and then a move towards action. There is mudita, which is joy for another one's happiness. And equanimity, which is known as this balancing factor. It protects the heart from going into envy, the excitement of mudita from becoming agitated. Protects compassion from sliding into what some call compassion fatigue, which is actually just pity. I really think of equanimity as being love plus clear boundaries plus tenderness without attachment. And equanimity is a practice I've really been living deeply within this past year. When I first met one of my teachers, Philip Moffat, who's been my mentor for many years, he would always say, the breath is like this, and this breath is like this, and this breath is just like this. And I'd always be like, it's like what, Philip? Like, finish your sentence. I don't know what you're talking about. But then I was also reminded of a teaching that I got really early on in my practice, and that was to allow the Dharma to just wash over me. And that whatever is needed to be known will reveal itself to me. and that it wasn't possible to be receptive to the Dharma in a body that was tight and rigid and a brain that was leaning forward, trying to understand it. That the body needed to be at ease and to be receptive. And that is where wisdom emerges. And that's really hard in a culture that's constantly asked us to respond to every single emotion that we have by clicking this button or taking this pill or listening to this app. We've been so conditioned to manage all that arises in our emotional body. And equanimity is inviting us to be in the stillness. So tatra majatata is this Pali expression which means to stand in the middle, to stay with the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows. Equanimity is a practice of a fierce heart. It allows us to go directly into the fire to see what's present, what needs to be tended to. Equanimity is not afraid, it does not back down. It stays present to whatever is arising. And it is a great support of wisdom and compassion. So I feel that I can't keep talking about what has supported my practice over this past year without talking about what stands up against it. And this leads us to looking back at the precepts, specifically looking at the precept of intoxicants. And I know for many of us, including myself, the precepts are really the foundation of my practice and sort of a litmus test to every interaction that I have in my life. So in the climate that we're in today, our sensationalized news media, social media, our handheld gadgets, and what a lot of us choose for entertainment can confuse the heart and mind when we believe what we are told and are not paying attention to this clear instructions the Buddha offered at Hepasico, to come and see for ourselves, to know through our lived experience what is our truth. For me, every intoxicant that I can think of that puts up this barrier to my truth can be dropped into a bucket of one of the three poisons of greed, hatred, or delusion. When ignorance is present and I begin to believe that the social conditioning around me that is rooted in the oppression of others is true, when I believe that others are better than, I know that my heart and mind have been colonized by these three poisons. When I forget my true nature, when I'm not able to see the humanity of others, and I meet anger with anger and fear with fear. When we're not paying attention, we can see how these poisons can lead to our unhappiness and our suffering. And just on the other side is this great opportunity for liberation and freedom, which gives us access to our true selves. And we can feel this in our bodies through hiri and ottappa, these two bright qualities that protect the world. And so hiri, which is spelled Hiri, is more of an internal gauge. It's that feeling that we get in the pit of our stomachs. I get a tingling on my armpit for some reason. It's our consciousness when it comes online. When we've done or said something that is not in alignment with our values. Hiri allows us to keep our self-respect and our integrity by gently reminding us of who we are. And she really invites us into our courage to stand in our integrity. And ottappa is more external and it's more relational. It's that sweet quality that allows us to move through the world with dignity and nobility, knowing that we have nothing that is blameworthy. Ottappa checks us when we are about to do something that might not be approved by others that we really respect and honor. And this ally of protecting the world is driven by being connected to something bigger than ourselves. It supports us in remembering that we are accountable to other living beings and our words, deeds, and actions. It reminds us that we are social beings and that we belong to each other. And this is easy to be reflected back when we surround ourselves with wise friends who've also committed to being on this path. So this is Kalyanamita, our spiritual friends who are good and admirable and noble. We turn towards these virtuous friendships when we need perspective, especially when we're not sure if we're seeing things right-sized in the world. I was recently under a writing deadline and I reached out to one of my Kalyanamita, who's also a writer. So I reached out to her for some advice and some support. And to be honest, because I was just procrastinating and I wanted to talk to someone and kind of take my mind off of writing for a little bit. Um, and she was like, well, how's the writing going? And I was like, it's not going that great. Like I'm doing a lot, I'm cleaning my house, but I'm not really writing. And she said, oh yeah, there's nothing cleaner than a writer's home when they're on a deadline. And I was like, huh. And so there's something that really is really profound, like both literally and metaphorically in that statement. And I was like, yeah, there's something about removing the clutter that sets up the conditions for the heart and mind and body um, to move through the world with more ease. So sweeping the temple, it clears out the three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion, creating the space that is needed to invite in tenderness and this deep care for one another. And so at the beginning of this talk, I spoke to my time in Uganda practicing with Bhante Buddha Rakita. And more than anything in my time with him, I learned a lot. But what really struck me and what I carried home with me was the lightness in which he moved through the world, how free he seemed to be, how nothing seemed to stick to him or weigh him down. And so when he offered this advice to me to let my practice be my life and my life to be my practice, for there to not be any separation, I knew that there is this deep nugget of wisdom that I needed to really hold close to my heart, to not throw it away because I didn't understand it at the time, but I knew that I was going to grow into it as my practice deepened and developed. And so I also knew that this was only going to be known if I kept my practice with me. Again, like not leaving it on the cushion and not just relying on my formal meditation practice, but to really take my practice, all of these different practices that I just mentioned, by bringing them into every aspect of my life, to have them influence every single thing that I do and every interaction with everybody in my life. And so Thich Nhat Hanh says, so the question is whether we are practicing loving ourselves, because loving ourselves means loving our community. When we are capable of loving ourselves, nourishing ourselves properly, not intoxicating ourselves, we are already protecting and nourishing society. Because in the moment when we are able to smile, to look at ourselves with compassion, our world begins to change. We may not have done anything, but when we are relaxed, when we are peaceful, when we are able to smile and listen to this, what Thich Nhat Hanh says, and not to be violent in the way we look at the system, at that moment, there is a change already in the world. And so, even though we have these systems that allow racism and oppression and harm to stay in place, we cannot be angry at these systems. We cannot be violent in the way that we look at these systems. When we turn, when there are things that we don't like, that we don't agree with, and again, we meet this fear and anger and rage with fear and anger or rage, it just takes up all the space in our heart and gives us no room to wiggle around and to find the humanity in others. And so my practice throughout these years has primarily been through studying, talking with spiritual friends, teaching, moving my body, having a really intimate relationship with the felt sense in my body, having a really intimate relationship with my breath, and feeling into the quivering of my heart. And really seeing how this whole thing shakes out when I'm in a relationship with other people. So many of the Buddhist teachings are about finding social harmony, about there being a disagreement or a question around ethical conduct, around how something should be done. And the Buddha kind of sweeps in and gives some advice, this pithy teaching on how folks should get along and how we should look at things with the intention of non-harming ourselves or others around us. And so these teachings, our practice, are not just about navel gazing. They are not just about our own personal liberation, but they're about engaging in the world with each other, caring for each other, because again, we belong to each other. And as we move out of one of the most difficult eras that I know I've ever lived in my life, as we rest in this great conjunction of these relational planets aligning, I invite you to explore what supports your practice. What gets in the way of our practice, of us seeing the humanity in others? And the most important question, what allows us to stay? So what allows us to stay? And so, dear ones, thank you so much for your kind attention and your deep listening to the Dharma this evening.